So I think about why we need to reimagine the movement to end gender violence. I think that it was amazing in its inception, you know, talking about, and the way we used to talk about it in the past, gender-based violence, right? That it was incredible that we were even beginning to think about the fact that there is a relationship with gender to violence. But we got really caught in some very binary boxes around how we think about gender and violence. And for many years, there was a story that men were perpetrators of violence and women were receivers of violence, and this was the totality of the picture. Why is it gendered then, if we're talking about a continuum and that we need to eschew the binary in thinking about this? Is that even in continua, there are places in which things occur, are more likely to occur, right? And so, and there's structural scenarios that give rise to where those things play out, right? So, well, we know that sexual abuse happens basically equally to boys and girls. We also know that the majority of folks who do sexual harm are male. And at the same time, if we start with the story that it's all men, then we're going to ignore the fact that women also commit sexual harm, right? So, but all of this is operating within patriarchy. And so if we don't take time to analyze the structural roots of this, then we aren't going to be getting to solutions in an appropriate way. And so while we do need to erode sort of binary notions of violence, we simultaneously need to understand that this is operating within patriarchy, within homophobia, within sexism, racism. All of these things are happening. These are the structural causes that give rise to things landing, you know, statistically more maybe on certain populations. And at the same time, if we don't look at that, then we're not going to be able to accurately understand what the root causes are. I think restorative justice has an important role to play in the movement to end gender violence. I think what I'm seeing from the cases that I've had the honor of facilitating, that there are many things we don't know about other people's lived experience. And so when we bring people face to face and they have an opportunity to hear from one another about the impact of their behavior, right? That is the way in which people wake up. And it is through that kind of open-hearted storytelling that can happen in face-to-face dialogues where I see sort of empathy move into real awareness, which then leads to a need to change behavior. That's an internal shift inside the young men who are doing harm. There's a lot of shame and secrecy that's involved in most forms of gender violence. And so restorative justice offers a container in which people can speak about these things. And so if we can't name it, we can't do anything about it. And there are places where we name things, in rallies and courtrooms, where there's a partial storytelling that we do under those circumstances. What I feel happens in restorative justice is a full accounting on all sides. And so not only is there freedom for those who've experienced victimization to tell the whole story about what happened and all the ways in which it lands on them, but in addition, the person who's done harm is given space to do a full accounting and a full storytelling of the impact that their lived experiences had on them that gave rise to them arriving at this moment of harm. So that feels very, very powerful and feels like a necessary way in which we're going to get to answers. At the Restorative Justice Project, we work in sort of two major areas. One is in youth diversion, and the other is in intimate partner, domestic violence, sexual harm, child sexual abuse. So on the youth diversion side, I think what is unique about our work is that we're really wedded to it being done without criminalization, right? So this is sort of the line that we draw, in part because young people are willing to tell us everything when we have an agreement with the prosecuting entity in the jurisdiction we're working in, that nothing that young people say can be used against them in a court of law, right? And that this isn't sort of attack onto your sentencing or attack onto you. This is done sort of entirely independent of the criminal legal system, ideally through diversion, or even ideally, that the community would be able to just refer directly to restorative justice when things go wrong. And the more direct that referral is from the moment of harm to restorative justice, the possibilities of getting at the roots of what's going on, sort of in a broader way, are much higher. A requirement to work with the Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice is that the district attorney in any jurisdiction that we're working with will have an agreement. It's a memorandum of understanding that has some really specific enumerated matters. One is that facilitators of restorative processes will not be subpoenaed to come testify about anything that we hear in these processes, whether it be in the preparation stages, in the conference itself, in the follow-up, right? And that nothing that's learned in these processes or that people speak honestly about, even if it sort of comes out post-conference, right? If it is learned through the conference, it effectively becomes sort of in legal context like fruit of the poisonous tree, right? You can't use that information in court later. If the district attorney doesn't agree to that in writing, then we're really putting people at risk. I would advise against doing restorative processes in relationship to the state without an agreement from the state. A practical example of this is a case in which there was a young man who sexually assaulted a classmate on school campus, and it was diverted ultimately by the district attorney, and we were pleased and surprised. The young woman who had been sexually assaulted, and she was 15 at the time, had to go through the school expulsion process, and she had decided that she was only going to have her mother speak in the conference and that she wasn't going to speak. In the meanwhile, working with a young man on the other side, realizing that he had no understanding whatsoever that there had been a sexual harm here, and that he thought they were getting together, and that this was something that she wanted. And so the radical disparity in their stories was really astounding. When we finally get to the conference, the day of the conference, again, the girl had said that she wasn't going to do any talking in the conference, that her mother was going to do the talking for her. And there's a sort of preamble that we do to sort of adjust people to the room and about the guidelines for confidentiality. And before we could even get really through those, she's just been looking at him, and I'm seeing a power rise up in her that I had never seen in any meeting prior to that. And she at some point just interrupts me and just launches in, and we were friends, and how could you do that? And like, it just started, and she was doing all the talking, and you just saw this look of complete joy and pride on her mother's face that was just, it was astounding. It was very powerful. At one point, she said, "I want to know what you were thinking. What were you thinking? What were you thinking?" And leading up to this, I'd seen his face starting to change, and I literally started to see an awareness of what the harm was start to arise when she said, "I know you learned from 10th grade health class what no means no means. But when I was pushing your hands away, that was no. And when I was crying, that was no. And when I didn't have to say the word no, because when I said, I'm not that kind of girl, that was no." And so she said, "What were you thinking? What were you thinking?" And he said, I thought you were into me. I thought you liked me." She turns beet red. And then she doesn't deny it, and she says, "What does that have to do with anything?" And at that moment, I saw everyone understand. And then she said, "So then when I was crying, why did you keep going, right? Why were you still trying to make this thing happen that I didn't want?" And he said, "Honestly, you're such a good girl, and I just thought you had to fight the first time." So, what a powerful moment. The whole room went completely silent. And the person who broke the silence was his mother, who turned to his sister and said, "See, I wanted you to know that even nice boys like your brother can think things like this." So, from there, what a thing to have a conversation then about where do these ideas come from? Where do boys learn these ideas? how do boys get taught these ideas? So in this case, what was super powerful was that this young woman said that what she really needed was for her reputation to be cleared up, because the rumor mill spread that she exaggerated the harm. It was not a rape case. It was not anything near a rape. She, again, wanted him to get educated about gender violence. Like, she wanted him to go to a Take Back the Night rally, and she wanted him to write a paper on gender violence. He ended up writing he was allowed to finish the school year from home, and he wrote his final paper on gender violence. And he also then, we heard from him after he started college. He was going to be the first person in his family to go to college. And had this case gone through the criminal legal system, he would not have been able to go to college. And so at the end of that, we heard back from him later that he had wanted to get involved in Consent is Sexy workshops on his college campus, and there was nothing like that. And he said, I'm seeing the things that I learned through the conference every day in college. And I really think it would be important for people to understand that, consent is a beautiful thing, and it's a part of the beauty of sexual involvement with another person, and that's a part of what makes you feel good, not taking something, but having it given to you. These kinds of follow-up conversations with this young man. So all around, incredible success, incredible learning experience, and one that we would like to see people allow to be recreated.